All right, let's move on to a topic that I was going to talk about at the beginning when it first was being brought up, and then I wasn't going to talk about it because it just kind of seemed like a non-story. And then I decided let's discuss it very briefly because I think that it's still worth discussing in some capacity, even though I think at the end of the day it's kind of a non-story. But I think it's still just worth touching upon because, it's about a property that a lot of people, especially people who watch the channel, care about very much. So Beyond the Spider-Verse is the third installment in the Spider-Man animated saga, right? I don't know what saga, series, trilogy, if you will, the one that's centering around Miles Morales with the incredibly successful, both critically and now financially with Across the Spider-Verse, with the incredibly successful Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and now Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and it's going to presumably end with Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse. But, these films, right? These films take a long, long time to make. I mean, it's not like you can just churn them out like the MCU Spider-Man films, which you had 3 of them in 5 years. I mean, people who love this franchise, they wish that it could be 3 in 5 years. But, these films take a long time to make. Now, the reason that I wanted to talk about this briefly is just because there's an interesting saga that's going on with these Spider-Verse films, because with the last film, which is an insanely successful film, it was super rated highly critically, and also financially did very well for itself. People were very much looking forward to the third iteration of the Spider-Verse trilogy, but there were reports that came out that said that the visual effects artists were basically being worked almost to death, right? Like they were being worked super long and unsustainable hours, and there was this whole threat of the visual effects artists unionizing and forming, going on strike and all these sorts of things. And so that was a big concern about that as well. And then there was just kind of radio silence on Beyond the Spider-Verse for a long, long while. And so people were kind of wondering what's going on. Is it happening? What's going on? And recently, the actor who plays the Indian Spider-Man, who also I think was the guy in Deadpool, right? Dopinder, who is most recently seen in Deadpool and Wolverine, he was recently interviewed, and he said, I think that they're going to be recording at some point pretty soon. So nothing like Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse is dead. But then a couple days ago, or a few days ago at this point, there was a rumor that said Beyond the Spider-Verse has essentially been entirely scrapped. And they were basically going to the drawing board, and they're going to cancel the film. They weren't ever going to cancel this film, but they were going back to the drawing board, and it's not going to come out for a long, long time. Then the composer of the film and Chris Miller, I believe, who is one of the part of the duo that is executive producing these films, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who are, they did the Lego movie, I believe they did the Jump Street movies as well. Very successful duo. They were also notoriously fired from Solo, whether that's Kathleen Kennedy or whatever they were doing on set, improvising the whole script. I don't know. No, we're not here to talk about Solo, but Chris Miller, I believe, went on Twitter and said basically the film is not being scrapped, and the composer essentially of the film said something to a similar effect, saying, just don't believe everything you hear. There's nothing going on. So here's the bottom line. This film is not coming out anytime soon. That has nothing to do with Sony, quote unquote, scrapping the film or whatever, the rumor was, because that has been confirmed. That's not happening. And I think that if it was happening, it would be a huge story. And who knows, maybe next week we hear a story about it and people are like, hey, it's actually gone. It's not happening, and people are just trying to save face right now. I seriously doubt it. But the bottom line as well is that I still think, despite all these things, that there was just enough, especially like I mentioned with the visual effects artists and just the development process with these films in general, where I don't think Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse is coming out until 2027 at the earliest. And I'm not saying this as somebody, because look, I've been on the record. I've done a rewatch video of Into the Spider-Verse, and I did a review of Across the Spider-Verse. And I am just personally not the number one fan of these films, which I should say should not be misconstrued into me, into people thinking I don't like the films. I like both of these films quite a bit. I think they're incredibly solid, good pieces of entertainment and good films, good pieces of cinema in general. And obviously just the visuals in general of the whole film, incredible. I really love the visuals. But as I've said before, I'm not the type of person who really latches onto visuals. I think that if you have a sort of visual thing that's going on, right, a different thing like Spider-Verse or whatever, or 1917, which the whole thing was, it's a one shot, whatever. I'm not the type of person who that's enough, right, to make me go through the whole film in kind of that, awe or whatever of the novelty, which is totally fine. Like, other people can, and that's totally great. I'm just not one of them. So I'm one of those people who, I don't think that these two Spider-Man films are the best Spider-Man films of all time. I think that, the Tom Holland trilogy, all three films, honestly, are better than them. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below about that. I'd love to hear them. But, what I'm saying here is I'm not saying this just because, I hate these films and I want it to come out in a long time. I just want to be realistic here and say that despite, my excitement, because, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse ended on a cliffhanger, right? And I'm very excited to see what happens next. And I think that if you watch Across the Spider-Verse and whatever Beyond the Spider-Verse ends up being, that it'll be a very satisfying story. So I'm very excited for these films. I just also want to be realistic for myself and for the rest of you guys that I think just there are a myriad of other factors here that will prevent Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse to not come out until 2027. But I leave a question to you guys. What do you think? When do you think we will see Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse? It is not being scrapped. That is the headline of this story. It is basically Much Ado About Nothing, and I almost, again, didn't want to talk about it here, but, I thought that it would be interesting to at least discuss a little bit just because of what it might mean for the release date. In fact, I think it means nothing. I think it was still going to come out something in 2026 or 2027 anyways. But let me know in the comments down below.